Hello everyone, and welcome back to Dr. Creepy. In tonight's video, we dive into 7 of the most disturbing, true cryptid horror stories. Chilling encounters with creatures and forces that don't belong in our world. From silent lights drifting through deep forests, to lakes that return people wrong, from cornfields where something whistles your name, to abandoned plants filled with inhuman howls. These stories reveal encounters their witnesses still can't explain. Shadows that detach from the people who cast them, figures climbing invisible steps in the trees, voices rising from sinkholes in the exact tone of the living, and creatures scraping through concrete like it's nothing but dust. If you're new here, make sure to like the video, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss a new true horror stories. Now get comfortable, and let's start. I've worked for the county's stormwater division for almost 9 years, and in all that time, I never believed the stories people whispered about the drainage tunnels. Teenagers said they heard voices inside them at night. Old folks in town claimed the tunnels ate people, and more than one missing person report mentioned the culverts by name. I always dismissed it as superstition. Concrete doesn't hunt people. Water doesn't mimic voices. At least, that's what I thought until last September. My job is simple: inspect the tunnels after storms, clear debris, make sure nothing is blocking water flow. The tunnels run under the whole town, stretching miles underground, big enough for a person to walk inside if they ducked. Most days they're dry. After rain, they become deep, roaring rivers. On the night that everything changed, we just had 3 days of non-stop rainfall. Trees were uprooted, yards flooded, and half the town's drainage grates were clogged with branches and trash. My supervisor called me at 9 p.m., telling me I needed to check the North End flood tunnel under Briar Road. He said water readings were acting weird. That phrasing, acting weird, already put me on edge. Still, it was my job. I drove out there with my equipment, flashlight, waders, a measuring pole, and a portable flood gauge. The entrance to the tunnel is a huge concrete mouth at the bottom of a slope. Most nights it looks harmless, almost boring. Not that night. The floodlights from my truck lit the tunnel's edge, and I saw water spilling out in slow, pulsing waves, as if something inside the tunnel was breathing. I stood there for a long second, listening. The usual sound should have been a steady rush of water echoing through the channel. Instead, I heard something else. Crying. Not faint, not far. Right inside the tunnel. At first, I honestly thought someone had gotten stuck inside during the storm, a homeless person maybe, or a kid messing around. The crying wasn't panicked, just tired, exhausted, drained. "Hello?" I yelled over the noise of the water. "Is someone in there?" The crying stopped instantly, but something shifted deeper inside. A scrape, a slow dragging sound. Then, another sound I have trouble describing. It was like someone trying to breathe with a mouthful of water. I should have called for backup. Protocol says you never, ever enter a tunnel alone at night, especially after a storm. But the crying had sounded so real, so human, that I couldn't walk away. I turned on my flashlight and stepped inside. The beam stretched far into the tunnel, illuminating the slick concrete walls and the shallow stream of water flowing down the center. The air smelled like wet dirt and mold. I walked slowly, keeping my boots planted on the narrow, dry ledges along the sides. "Hey," I called gently. "If you can hear me, I'm here to help. Just call out. Tell me where you are." Nothing. Just the sound of water dripping from the ceiling and my own footsteps echoing. 30 feet in, I noticed the water level behind me had risen slightly. Not by much, but enough to make me glance back at the entrance. Rain wasn't falling anymore. Nothing should have been increasing the water flow. I kept going. 50 feet in, my flashlight beam hit something floating in the water ahead of me. It looked like a plastic toy or a scrap of fabric. As I got closer, I realized it was a shoe, a child's shoe. The inside of the tunnel felt smaller after that. My breathing got tight, my stomach twisted. I lifted my radio to call my supervisor, and froze. Someone whispered my name. Not shouted, not called, whispered. My full name, not sir, not hey, just Daniel, in a hoarse, choking voice. It came from deeper in the tunnel. I aimed my flashlight toward the sound. The beam shook wildly, bouncing off the curved concrete walls. "Who's there?" My voice cracked. "Are you hurt?" There was a long silence. Then the crying started again, but this time it echoed wrong. It sounded like multiple people crying together, perfectly synchronized, as if they shared the same lungs. It filled the tunnel. It filled my ears. And then it cut off like someone pressing mute. A new sound replaced it. A splash, then another. Then the unmistakable sound of hands slapping wet concrete as something crawled toward me. I backed up fast, keeping my flashlight forward. The light finally caught movement, a pale shape dragging itself along the tunnel floor. The body was long, too long, stretched unnaturally thin. Its elbows jutted out at strange angles. Its legs were bent backward like a cricket's. But the worst part was the face. It wasn't a face. It was smooth, featureless except for a wet, gaping slit where a mouth should be. The slit pulsed open and closed in a slow rhythm, breathing, imitating. "Daniel," it whispered again. But this time I understood. It wasn't saying my name. It was rehearsing it, practicing, learning the sound of me. I stumbled backward, nearly slipping into the water. The creature jerked suddenly, its limbs contorting as if it had been shocked with electricity. Then, impossibly fast, it climbed up the side of the tunnel wall, clinging to it like an insect. Its long torso twisted unnaturally, so its slit face stared directly down at me. I ran. I didn't care about my equipment. I didn't care about the rules. I didn't care about anything except the burning instinct to get out of that tunnel alive. Behind me, I heard it crawling. Not steadily, not rhythmically, but in bursts, like it was leaping from wall to wall, closing the distance in erratic, twitching motions. The tunnel entrance was a small white square in the darkness ahead. I sprinted toward it, lungs burning, legs shaking, water splashed onto my boots. The tunnel walls felt like they were closing in. "Daniel," the whisper came again, but now it was perfect. My exact voice, my exact tone. It was me. It was calling to me in my own voice. I didn't look back. I didn't breathe. I just ran until I burst out of the tunnel, stumbling into the muddy slope outside. The night air hit me like ice. I spun around, aiming my flashlight at the tunnel entrance. Nothing. Just the slow pulse of water flowing out. But the water wasn't right. It was rising. Slowly, steadily rising against gravity, pushing outward from the tunnel like something inside was exhaling. Then, just before the water overflowed, I heard one final sound from inside. A soft tapping, knuckles on concrete, as if it were knocking, asking to come out. I dove into my truck and sped away so fast I tore up half the slope. I didn't go home that night. I drove to my brother's place and sat in my truck until sunrise, gripping the steering wheel until I lost feeling in my hands. The next morning, the county sent a crew to inspect the tunnel. They found nothing except debris and muddy water. No shoe, no marks on the walls, no signs of anyone being there. But the water flow sensors inside the tunnel had recorded something. Between 9:34 p.m. and 9:51 p.m., the exact time I was inside, the water flow readings spiked and dropped in patterns. Not random patterns, rhythmic ones, like someone tapping a code on the pressure meters, like someone breathing. I quit my job 1 week later. But what keeps me awake at night isn't the creature itself. It's this. Every once in a while, when it rains hard enough, I hear my phone buzz with a weather alert. Flash flood warning for Briar Road tunnels. Possible obstruction detected, water levels rising, and at the bottom of the alert, it always says the same thing. Sensor ID D7-2. Human vocalization detected 1732 was my employee ID. The system still thinks I'm inside that tunnel, still alive, still down there, still calling for help. I used to think that living next to farmland meant peace and quiet. Endless night skies, warm summers, the smell of cut grass, stuff you miss when you grow up around concrete and traffic. I moved to the countryside because I wanted that silence. I wanted a place where nothing strange ever happened. But silence can hide things. Silence can listen. Silence can wait for you to drop your guard. The cornfield next to my rental house proved that to me. The property was just outside a small Midwestern town, one of those places with a population sign that always ends with a number 7, like someone's keeping track manually. The landlord didn't give me much information, just said the field was owned by the same family for generations, and they came by twice a year. Once to plant, once to harvest. No one told me the cornfield was occupied the rest of the year. Not by people, not by anything I could reason with. The first time I heard the whistle, I had been living there for only a week. It was around 2 a.m., and I was sitting on the back porch smoking a cigarette. The corn stretched out behind the house, tall, dark, and unmoving in the still summer air. Then the whistle came, low and soft, like two notes from an old wooden flute. Woo-wee! I froze. The sound drifted across the corn, rising and falling gently. It didn't sound human, but it also didn't sound animal. It was too deliberate, too patterned. I listened for nearly a full minute. The whistle repeated every 5 seconds. Woo-wee! I should have gone back inside. That would have been the smart thing. Instead, I cupped my hands around my mouth and yelled, "Hello? Someone out there?" The whistle stopped immediately. The entire night went still, as if every insect, every leaf, every grain of soil was holding its breath. Then came a sound that made my skin crawl. Footsteps, soft ones, moving between the corn rows. But cornfields don't have soil that lets you walk quietly. Every step crunches, snaps, rustles. This sound didn't. It was like something tall was gliding through the field, brushing only the husks. I backed toward the door and went inside, locking it behind me. Sleep was impossible after that. The next morning, curiosity outweighed fear. I walked out to the edge of the field with my coffee and looked at the rows. They were still and empty, just thick green walls of corn. I stepped inside a few feet, careful not to get lost. Nothing. No footprints, no signs of movement. I convinced myself it was wind or some kind of bird call. Rationality makes liars of us all. The second time it happened, it was around midnight. I was brushing my teeth in the bathroom when I heard it through the open window. Whee! This time it was louder, closer. I walked to the living room and looked out the back door. The cornfield was just darkness. But the whistle came again, and this time something answered it. A second whistle, higher pitched, shorter. Whoa! Two tones reversing mine. I didn't speak, I didn't breathe. I just listened. The two whistles went back and forth across the field like a conversation. Whoa, wee! Whoa, wee! Whoa! Then they stopped. I snapped the curtains shut and spent the night on the couch with the lights on. By the third incident, fear had transformed into something worse, paranoia. I kept the blinds closed day and night. I checked the locks twice, then twice more. I stopped sitting outside after dark. But none of that mattered, because the whistle moved, it found me. 3 nights later, the sound came from right outside my bedroom window. Not from the field, not from the yard, right outside my window. I shot up from bed, heart pounding so loud I heard it in my teeth. The whistle was soft, almost playful this time. Slow, like someone trying to lull me back to sleep. Woo, wee. I crept to the window and pulled the curtain back just a sliver. There was nothing, just darkness. But then I saw it. The corn closest to the house was moving. Not swaying, not bending from wind, but shifting, tilting inward, as if something tall was gently pushing them aside as it stood just out of sight. The entire row leaned closer to the house, like a throat craning toward a whisper. I let the curtain fall shut and backed away. That night, I didn't sleep. The next day, I drove into town and asked the owner of a local hardware store if he'd heard anything strange in the fields around my house. He stared at me too long, then said, "You're renting the old Miller place, right?" "Yeah." "Then don't go out at night, and don't answer if something calls for you." I asked him what that meant, and he motioned for me to lower my voice. "Back in the 80s, he whispered, 3 kids went missing near that cornfield. All anyone heard was whistling." He didn't elaborate, and I didn't want him to. That night, things escalated. I was sitting on the couch, lights off, TV on low volume, trying not to think about the field, trying not to think about the whistle. Then my TV cut out, audio gone, screen black. At the exact same moment, the whistle came from the living room window. Woo! Wee! Louder than I'd ever heard it, like it was pressed against the glass. My blood went cold. I didn't move. I just stared at the window. Something scraped against the other side, slow, dragging nails, long ones. Then it knocked. 3 gentle taps, like it was being polite. I whispered to myself, "Don't answer." The whistling stopped. The entire house went silent. Then, woo! The second whistle, the higher one, from the back door. 2 of them, one at each entrance. They were circling me. My heart hammered so hard I felt dizzy. I didn't know what they wanted, but it was clear they were getting closer every night, testing boundaries. I crawled into the hallway, sat against the wall, and dialed 911. The operator asked my address, and I gave it, trembling. She asked what the emergency was. Before I could answer, a voice whispered behind me, "Woo, we." I dropped the phone and ran to the bathroom, locking myself inside. The operator was still on the line. I heard her tiny voice through the dropped phone saying, "Hello, sir? Are you safe?" But I couldn't pick it back up because something was outside the bathroom door, breathing, slowly, deeply. Then it whistled. Not the two-tone sound I'd heard, not an imitation, but a long rising whistle that lasted almost 15 seconds. A whistle from lungs no human should have. The doorknob twitched, just once. Testing. I pressed my back against the door and held my breath until I thought my lungs would explode. 5 minutes passed, then 10, then 20. Silence returned. A deputy arrived 30 minutes later. He searched the yard, the windows, the whole property. He didn't find footprints. He didn't find broken branches. He didn't find anything out of place. But when he stepped into the entryway, he froze. "Terry?" he called out to his partner. "You see this?" He pointed at the front door. On the inside of the glass, facing the house, were 2 long smears. Not fingerprints, not handprints. Smears like someone with wet, elongated fingers had dragged them slowly down the glass while looking in. The deputy swallowed hard and asked, "These here before tonight?" I shook my head. He stared at the glass for a long, long time. Then he said, "You should think about moving." I didn't need convincing. I packed everything before sunrise and left that house without looking back. The landlord kept my deposit, claiming I'd damaged the window with fingerprints. I didn't argue. I didn't care. But the story doesn't end there. 2 weeks after I moved to a different town, I got a voicemail from the hardware store owner who'd warned me. He said they harvested the Miller cornfield early. Something was in there. He didn't specify what, but I heard it in his voice. He was afraid. And then, as he hung up, the last 3 seconds of the voicemail made my blood run cold. Soft, slurred, too close to the microphone. A whistle. Wait! But this one didn't come from the voicemail. It came from my window, behind me. And when I turned, the leaves of the tree outside were tilting toward the glass, just like the corn rows had, like something tall was standing behind them, listening, mimicking, waiting for me to look away. I didn't sleep that night. And sometimes, even now, I hear faint whistling outside my new apartment, 2 tones drifting up the street, not loud, not close, but patient, always patient. When the sinkhole appeared, I didn't think much of it. Our backyard had always been soft after rain, muddy, uneven, the kind of ground that swallowed your boots if you weren't careful. But this wasn't a puddle or a sagging patch of earth. It was a hole, a perfectly round one. 6 feet wide, maybe 8 feet deep, and it appeared overnight. My wife, Hannah, noticed it first. I heard her calling from the yard early that morning, her voice tight and thin. "Daniel, come look at this." I walked outside with my coffee and nearly dropped the mug. The grass around the hole had peeled inward, like something pulled the ground down from below, rather than the soil collapsing naturally. I peered over the edge. The sides were smooth, too smooth, like the soil had been carved away. At the bottom, there was a puddle of muddy water, still and dark. I tossed a small stone inside, listening. It didn't splash, it didn't sink, it didn't even ripple. It made a dull, soft sound, like it landed on a sponge. That was the first thing that felt wrong. The second thing happened that night. Around 2 a.m., I woke up to a sound I couldn't place. Not footsteps, not wind, not rain. It was rhythmic. Tap, tap, tap. It took me a moment to realize it wasn't coming from the house. It was coming from the backyard. "Do you hear that?" I asked Hannah, but she was already awake, staring at the ceiling. "It's coming from the hole," she whispered. I looked out the window and saw nothing but darkness. But the tapping didn't stop. It continued for nearly 20 minutes. Slow, deliberate, patient. Not frantic, not random, intentional. In the morning, we found nothing at the bottom of the hole. No animal tracks, no branches, no debris. But the water level had risen by at least 2 inches, even though it hadn't rained. I told myself it was groundwater. I told myself a lot of things. 2 days later, the tapping changed. It sounded closer, almost as if something inside the hole was knocking on the dirt walls instead of the bottom. The rhythm was wrong now. Faster, like fingers instead of knuckles. My dog, Jasper, refused to go into the yard at all. He'd plant his feet and whine, trembling until we dragged him back inside. Even the neighborhood stray cats that used to lounge in our yard stopped coming by. Animals know things. They know before we do. On the fourth night, I made a mistake. I got too close. It was just after midnight. I couldn't sleep, and the tapping had begun earlier than usual, this time mixed with a strange, low hum. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped outside, ignoring Hannah's protests. The closer I walked to the sinkhole, the colder the air felt, like a winter front passing through a summer night. I aimed the light down. Something moved, not fast, not sudden, just a slight shift in the water, like something beneath the surface was slowly rising. Jasper barked from the porch, a sharp, panicked bark. I turned to hush him when a voice drifted up from the sinkhole, my own voice. "Daniel." I stumbled backwards so fast I tripped on the grass, the flashlight falling from my hand and rolling to the edge. The voice called again. "Daniel, help me." It sounded distorted, wet, like someone speaking with their mouth full of water. But it was unmistakably my voice. I crawled forward just enough to grab the flashlight and backed away again, shining the beam downward. The hole was quiet now, still, but the water at the bottom was no longer flat. It pulsed gently, like a heartbeat. I ran back inside and locked the door. Hannah stared at me. "What did you see?" My mouth went dry. It spoke. What spoke? I don't know. We slept in the living room that night with all the lights on. The next morning, I called a local excavation company, telling them we needed the hole filled immediately. They agreed to come the following afternoon, but the hole didn't wait for them. Around 11 p.m. that night, the tapping returned, this time frantic. Fast, erratic, desperate. Tap, 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 tap. It sounded like dozens of fingers drumming on the soil. Hannah grabbed my arm. "Don't go out there this time." I didn't plan to, but curiosity is a sickness. Fear makes you stupid. Silence makes you brave in the worst possible ways. I opened the back door just a crack. The tapping stopped instantly. The yard went silent, completely silent, not even insects. Then I heard breathing. From the hole, slow, gargled, thick breathing, as if something enormous was just beneath the surface, inhaling through water. I slammed the door shut. An hour later, we heard something else, scratching. Not from the bottom, not from the sides, but from the rim of the hole. Whatever was inside was climbing. Hannah grabbed the phone to call 911. I told her not to. What would we even say? Something is climbing out of a hole we didn't report earlier because we were afraid people would think we're insane. She didn't press the issue, because the moment she picked up the phone, the scratching stopped. Total silence filled the yard, a perfect hollow stillness that pressed against the windows. We waited, 5 minutes, 10, 20. Then, at exactly midnight, the low hum returned, deeper and closer, vibrating the window glass like a subwoofer. We didn't sleep until sunrise. The excavation crew arrived at noon. 3 men with heavy machinery, a small backhoe, concrete mix, and soil. They walked to the edge of the sinkhole, talking casually. Then all 3 went silent. The hole had changed. It wasn't 8 feet deep anymore. It was 15, maybe 20. And the walls weren't smooth now. They were carved with grooves. Long, uneven grooves as if something had dragged its fingers all the way up. "What the hell made those?" one worker asked. I didn't answer. They lowered a camera into the hole. The feed showed soil, water, darkness. Then, something white flashed across the lens. The camera jerked violently, the lines snapped, and the feed went dead. "That's it," the crew leader said, grabbing his equipment. "We're not filling this thing. This is geological, or something else. You need to call the county." They left immediately. By dusk, the backyard smelled like rot. Not sewage, not animal decay. A thick, heavy smell, like wet dirt mixed with spoiled meat. As night fell, the tapping returned. Not from the hole, from the walls of our house, slow at first, then faster, then all at once, hundreds of taps coming from every direction. The foundation, the siding, the windows. It sounded like dozens of hands were pressing against the house, searching for a way in. I grabbed Hannah, and we retreated to the hallway, the only place with no direct windows. Jasper barked non-stop, shaking violently. Then the lights flickered, once, twice, and then the backyard door handle moved. Something outside was turning it, slowly. Click, 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 click. Then, in my own voice, "Let me in." I grabbed the shotgun I kept in the closet and aimed it at the door. "Stay away," I yelled. The voice stopped, then a new sound came, low, vibrating, crawling up the walls. A deep, wet rumble. like something massive was exhaling. Suddenly, the smell vanished. The tapping stopped. The light stabilized. The entire house fell silent. We waited 2 hours before moving. When I finally looked outside, the sinkhole was gone, filled in, perfectly level with the ground, but not with soil, with something smooth, hard, dark. Something like dried clay or stone, molded flawlessly, as if someone had packed the hole from below. I didn't sleep that night or the next. 3 days later, we sold the house and moved. 6 months have passed since then. Sometimes, late at night, I check the local news for our old neighborhood. I look for reports of strange holes, missing pets, anything that might confirm what we lived through. Yesterday morning, something was finally reported. A sinkhole. 2 streets over from our old house. Same size as ours, same perfect shape, same strange, smooth interior. The article said the county had sealed off the area. But one sentence at the end chilled me. Neighbors reported hearing knocking sounds from the hole during the night. Last night, just before bed, I heard a soft, distant noise outside my new house. A sound I hoped I'd never hear again. Tap, tap, tap. But the worst part wasn't the tapping. It was the voice that followed. My voice, soft, wet, rising from the backyard. Daniel, help me. I'm not going outside, I'm not looking at the yard, I'm not acknowledging it. But I know one thing for certain. You can fill a sinkhole, but you cannot bury something that was trying to climb out. I've always believed there are 2 versions of every person, the one others see and the one they imagine you to be. But I never thought a shadow could decide which version it preferred. Not until last winter. At the time, I was working overnight security at a distribution warehouse outside Denver. The building was huge, almost 400,000 square feet of aisles, shelves, packing stations, and loading docks. During the day, the place buzzed like a beehive. At night, it was a tomb, just me, a radio, and a few cameras that only worked when they felt like it. People say empty warehouses are creepy. They're wrong. They aren't creepy. They're lonely, and the loneliness makes the creepy parts louder. I always worked the 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. shift. Most nights were quiet. I'd walk the perimeter, check the docks, push open the office doors to make sure no one was sleeping behind them. The usual stuff. But the night everything changed started simple. A blackout. The whole building went dark at 1:14 a.m. Not a flicker, not a surge, just sudden, choking darkness. My flashlight became the only thing separating me from miles of shadows. I radioed the power company, then the on-call supervisor, then started sweeping the building. The warehouse felt different without lights, bigger, emptier, full of pockets of space my brain filled with imaginary movement. That's when I saw the first shadow. It stretched across aisle 17, a long, very human silhouette cast on the concrete floor by nothing. No person, no object, no light source behind it, just a shadow lying there like someone had painted it. I froze. Then I waved my flashlight across the aisle. The shadow didn't move. It stayed there, flat and still. I stepped closer, convinced it was some trick of the darkness or a leftover burn on the concrete from machinery. But the closer I got, the more wrong it felt. It wasn't fading in light. It wasn't reacting to my movements. It just stayed perfectly sharp, even when my flashlight was directly above it. I backed away slowly, telling myself it was just fatigue playing tricks. I continued my sweep, but I kept looking over my shoulder. The blackout lasted nearly 20 minutes. The shadow stayed on the floor the entire time. When the power finally came back on, the shadow vanished instantly, snuffed out like it had never been there. But that was only the first time I saw it. The second time was worse. A week later, another blackout hit at 3:22 a.m. This one wasn't building-wide. Only my section, rows 15 through 22, went dark. The rest of the warehouse stayed lit, humming normally. I walked into the dark zone, thinking a breaker had tripped, and I saw it again. The shadow was at the end of aisle 19, longer this time, leaner, more defined. Its head was tilted like it was looking toward me. I pointed my flashlight at it. The beam hit the floor, but the shadow stayed. No distortion, no shrink. It was as if my light passed through it. "Is someone here?" I called out before thinking. The shadow shifted. Not a lot, not enough to say it moved naturally, but it elongated, stretching toward me by maybe 6 inches. I stepped back, my radio crackled. It was dispatch. "Motion sensor triggered in your sector." "You good, Daniel?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. Because when I looked down at the floor, I noticed something else. My shadow, the one cast by my flashlight, wasn't behaving right. It was moving a split second slower than I was, like it was thinking about keeping up. I lifted my hand slightly. My shadow lifted its hand, slower, like a delayed reflection in a bad video call. "That's not possible," I whispered. Behind me, at the end of the aisle, the darker shadow, the wrong one, tilted its head again, as if watching, as if comparing, as if choosing. I bolted out of the aisle, nearly tripping on a pallet, and didn't stop running until I was in the break room under full lighting. That was the night I started dreading my own shadow. The third time, it touched me. I was in the warehouse office, checking the camera feeds. Half of them were static as usual, but something felt off. The room felt colder. The hum of the lights sounded thinner. I looked down. My shadow wasn't beneath me. It was behind me, stretching along the wall, not where my body was, not where the light fell, but rising up behind me like a second figure. It pressed close as if leaning over my shoulder. I stood perfectly still. Then something icy dragged across the back of my neck. Not air, not cold, a pressure, like someone pressing their palm lightly against my skin. My breath hitched. The shadow on the wall tilted its head. I turned around. Nothing there. When I looked back at the wall, my real shadow returned to normal. Flat, obedient, boring. But I knew what I felt. Something had touched me. It escalated from there. At home, strange things began happening. When I showered, I'd look down and see my shadow facing the wrong way, turned toward me even though I faced the wall. In the kitchen, my shadow would arrive a half second before I did, sliding onto the floor from around the corner like it had been waiting. Sometimes when I blinked, I'd swear it moved just a little too quickly back into place. I started keeping the lights on at night. It didn't help, because shadows aren't tied to darkness, they're tied to light, and light exists everywhere. The night it chose me, I was walking through the warehouse hallway during my shift. The blackout hadn't happened. Everything seemed normal. And then I saw footprints, not real ones, shadow footprints. Blackened shapes on the floor, as if invisible feet were walking in front of me, one step, then another, leading toward the loading docks. I followed them stupidly. Fear does that, staying several feet behind. The footprints moved in perfect rhythm, too steady, too slow, as if intentionally guiding. When I reached Dock 6, the air felt heavy. The overhead light flickered as if struggling. Then I saw it. My shadow detached from me. It peeled off the floor like smoke lifting off asphalt. It rose up, tall and thin, not matching my shape anymore. Its arms lengthened unnaturally. Its head tilted the same way the first shadow in the aisle had. It stepped toward me. I froze. Then, it stepped into me. Not around me, not toward me, into me. The world went black for 1 second, then 2, then 3. I couldn't breathe, couldn't move. For a horrifying moment, I felt something searching inside me, like fingers running along my ribs from the inside, feeling for places to latch on. Then it was gone. The lights flickered back to normal. I stumbled backward, gasping for air. My shadow lay flat on the ground again, normal. But I knew better. I knew what happened. It didn't disappear. It settled. It chose. After that, I wasn't the same. People at work noticed first. "You look pale, man. You sleeping? You okay?" You keep staring at the floor. I couldn't explain it, because I didn't know how to say, my shadow isn't mine anymore. It didn't match me. It moved differently. It lagged. It hesitated. It swelled wider than it should when I was nervous. Sometimes it stretched along the floor as if crawling toward things I wasn't looking at. One morning, I woke up on the kitchen floor with no memory of walking there. The refrigerator door was open. A chair was overturned. My feet were muddy with black dust. And on the wall, written not in marker but in shadow, dark smudges that had no source of light, was a sentence, almost ready. I scrubbed the wall. The words didn't fade until sunrise. The final night at the warehouse. It happened during another blackout. Not accidental. I think the shadow caused it. The lights went out at 2:11 a.m., but this time I didn't bother calling anyone. I just stood still. I knew it was coming. Footsteps echoed from the aisles, not light ones, heavy, dragging. My flashlight flickered, then died, even with fresh batteries. I felt the air shift behind me, like a huge void opening. I turned around. There were 6 shadows in the aisle, none of them connected to anything. All of them tall, all of them facing me. They moved in unison, but only one of them belonged to me. My own shadow peeled upward again, separating itself like an oil slick rising off a puddle. It approached the others. They surrounded it. For a moment, they seemed to merge, my shadow blending into them, their darkness folding into mine, until I couldn't tell which was which. Then something stepped forward, a shape wearing my outline. My proportions, my gait, but wrong, too fluid, too tall, too eager. A shadow shaped like me, but not me. My real shadow stayed behind with the others, motionless, as if pinned to the floor. The shadow wearing my shape stepped closer. I felt the moment it touched my feet. It didn't settle into me this time, it pushed. I felt myself fall backward, not physically, but mentally, as if something shoved my awareness out of my own body. For 2 seconds, I was weightless, displaced, watching through someone else's eyes. Then, a jolt, a collapse. My vision snapped back into place. I was lying on the warehouse floor. The lights buzzed back on. I sat up slowly. My shadow was normal again, or so it seemed, but I felt different. Off, tilted, like a picture hung slightly crooked. When I stood, my balance felt wrong, my weight shifting too far forward, as if something inside me leaned first before the rest of me followed. I quit the next morning. You might think this is the end. It isn't. Because shadows aren't tied to where you are. They're tied to who you are. I see subtle changes every day. When I walk past windows, my reflection lags. When I turn corners, I sometimes glimpse a second shape behind me. When I look at my shadow on the sidewalk, it stands a little straighter than I do. 2 nights ago, while brushing my teeth, I looked down and saw my shadow in the mirror. But shadows don't appear in mirrors. Reflections do. Whatever stands behind me isn't copying anymore. It's practicing, perfecting, getting ready to replace something else. Last night, while trying to sleep, I felt a cold pressure on my chest, light at first, then heavier, until my breath came in sharp, ragged pulls. I looked at the wall across the room. My shadow wasn't on the floor. It was standing on the wall, upright, hands pressed forward like it was trying to push its way out of the surface, its head tilted toward me. Just like the first time, I think it wants my place. I think it's almost done learning. And I think if you see your shadow move 1 second too slow, it's already watching you, waiting, choosing. I used to work maintenance for the state highway department, mostly repairing fence lines and clearing debris after storms. It wasn't glamorous, but I liked the quiet. I liked being out on long stretches of country road where nothing happened except the weather. I liked hearing nothing but wind and the occasional truck engine echoing miles away. That stretch of peace ended the night I met the stair runner. People in town had whispered about him for years, calling him a ghost, a trick of the moonlight, a hallucination from tired drivers. I thought it was nonsense. I didn't believe in the paranormal. I didn't believe in anything I couldn't measure. But I couldn't measure what I saw that night. It was late October, cold enough that my breath fogged the windshield. I had been sent out to inspect a damaged guardrail on a rural highway that cut through dense forest. Most of the road had no shoulder, just steep drop-offs into trees that looked black in the dark. I remember glancing at the clock as I pulled up to the site, 2:08 a.m. The highway was deserted. No headlights, no taillights, nothing but distant static on my radio as I stepped out of my truck with a flashlight. The wind was dead still. No rustling leaves, no shifting branches, just the quiet hum of the idling engine. When I aimed my flashlight down the damaged guardrail, I saw torn metal, a ripped-up section of dirt, and tire tracks veering toward the embankment. Probably a drunk driver, probably lucky enough to walk away. But then I saw footprints, not normal ones, bare feet, long, narrow, deep in the cold mud. The stride was wrong, too long, too wide, like someone had been lunging or leaping. They started at the torn-up section of dirt, crossed the shoulder, and disappeared into the trees. No sign of blood, no sign of clothing, just bare, wet footprints heading straight into the forest. I followed them with my flashlight beam, but the beam only pierced about 20 feet before being swallowed by darkness. Something about the prints made me uneasy, so I backed away and returned to my truck. I decided to document the guardrail and leave the rest for morning. I had just started writing when my radio cracked. A long burst of static, then a voice, thin and distorted. "Do not go into the tree line." I froze. "Control?" I said. "Repeat that?" Nothing. Static. Silence. I waited 30 seconds before chalking it up to interference. Highway radios were old and unpredictable. I went back to work, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. When I finally finished taking photos, I shut off the camera and looked up at the forest. That's when I heard it, a soft thump. Then another, getting louder, closer. It didn't sound like footsteps on soil. It sounded like feet hitting something solid, something hollow, wood, hardwood. The same rhythm someone would make if they were climbing stairs. One step, another. Except there were no stairs in the forest. I scanned the trees with my flashlight, and the light caught something pale between the trunks, something moving upward at an angle. At first, I thought it was a reflection. Then the figure stepped fully into view. A tall, thin man with tangled hair, wearing nothing but torn shorts. His skin was grayish, stretched tight over sharp bones. His limbs were long, too long, and his knees bent slightly inward with every step. He wasn't climbing anything. He was running upward. His feet hit the air like invisible steps rising between the trees, smooth, precise, practiced. He climbed 10, 15, 20 feet above the ground without ever touching a branch. My stomach dropped. My flashlight shook. The man paused midair, one foot lifted onto an invisible riser, and turned his head toward me. Even from far away, I felt his eyes lock onto me. There was no expression on his face, no curiosity, no malice, just awareness. I backed up instinctively. He moved again, slow, deliberate steps downward, but not toward the ground, toward me, like someone descending bleachers, stepping into the space between us. Each footfall thudded against nothing I could see, but I heard it, every step. Louder, closer. I stumbled backward into my truck door, slammed it shut, and threw the vehicle into reverse. Gravel kicked up behind me. My tires spun. My heart hammered so violently I could barely breathe. The stair runner took one more step toward the edge of the forest. Then he stopped. Something changed in his posture. His shoulders tightened, and his head jerked slightly, like he heard something behind him or felt something move through the air. For a terrifying moment, I thought he was listening to me breathe. Then he pivoted on an invisible step, turned away, and sprinted upward into the trees once more, climbing nothing, until he disappeared into the darkness above the canopy. The forest went silent, so silent my ears rang. I stayed in my truck for 5 minutes, gripping the wheel, whispering to myself that I imagined the whole thing. But there were muddy footprints on the ground, fresh ones, deep ones, leading out of the forest. And while I watched, the prints slowly filled with water from melting frost, not enough to blur their shape, just enough to prove they'd been made minutes earlier. I drove back to the station as fast as I could without losing control. I didn't tell anyone what I saw. I reported the guardrail damage, logged the incident, and went home shaking. I thought that would be the end of it. It wasn't. 3 nights later, I was driving the same stretch of road on routine patrol. My stomach knotted the entire time. I avoided looking at the forest. I kept the radio volume low so it wouldn't drown out any strange sounds. I had just passed the marker near the old guardrail when something slammed onto the roof of my truck. The roof buckled inward. My windshield trembled. My heart leapt into my throat. Something was on top of the truck. I swerved instinctively, and the weight shifted abruptly. My headlights illuminated the road, and the beam caught a pale leg sliding across the glass, long toes scraping the windshield. I slammed the brakes. The figure rolled off the hood and landed on the asphalt in front of me in a crouched, unnatural position, balanced on the balls of his feet, knees bent at impossible angles. The stair runner. He rose slowly, every joint cracking loudly in the quiet night. His head twitched, then rotated a few degrees too far, like a broken puppet aligning itself. He took one step toward me, then climbed upward. He walked into the air right in front of my truck, stepping on invisible risers that led into the darkness above. He never broke eye contact. Step after step, he ascended toward nothing. But the sound he made was wrong. Each footfall echoed like he was inside a hollow building. Wood, boards, stairs, something that shouldn't have existed in the open air. The moment he vanished above the tree line, the weight lifted from my chest, and I peeled out of there, tires screeching. When I got home, I sat in my shower fully clothed for nearly an hour. No amount of hot water could stop the shaking. The next day, I drove the route in daylight, trying to prove to myself nothing was there. No structure, no sign of stairs, no footprints, nothing. But the tire marks from my sudden stop were still on the asphalt, and so were the toe-shaped smears across my windshield. I scheduled a transfer the following week. Before I left, my supervisor handed me a radio transcript someone had printed out and left anonymously on his desk. He said it concerned my route. The date was the same night I first saw the stair runner, 1:58 a.m., 12 minutes before I arrived. The transcript read, "If any units are near Highway 14, avoid the forest line. Repeat, avoid the forest line. Do not acknowledge movement above." It ended there. The last line was scribbled out. No signature, no explanation. I transferred districts a month later. I moved into a small apartment in a well-lit neighborhood far from forests, far from dark roads, far from anything resembling invisible staircases. But last week, while taking out the trash behind my building, I froze. Softly, faintly, from somewhere above the alley, thump, 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 footsteps, ascending, step by step, climbing nothing. I looked up. The night sky hung quiet above me. But I swear, for a split second, I saw a pale foot pulling upward into the darkness, onto a stair I still couldn't see. I went inside, locked every window, shut every curtain, because now I know something terrible. Once the stair runner sees you, he remembers you. And once he remembers you, he follows, not on the ground, not on the road, but above you, always climbing, always getting closer, one invisible step at a time. When people vanish near a lake, search teams always assume drowning. That's the logical explanation. Lakes are cold, deep, unpredictable. But logic doesn't apply to Crescent Lake. Not anymore. Not after what happened last summer. I was a volunteer for the county search and rescue unit. Small team, mostly fishermen, retired firefighters, and a few outdoorsy types. We handled missing hikers, overturned kayaks, the usual. Crescent Lake was our territory. An old glacial lake wrapped in tall pines, beautiful on postcards and miserable in real life. The water was always cold, even in August. Dark too, with a strange green tint that made it impossible to see more than a few feet down. Locals called it Bottomless Crescent. I didn't believe the name until the night I pulled someone out of it. It started on July 18th. A storm rolled through that afternoon, leaving the lake covered in mist. The air smelled like rain and algae. I'd just gotten home when the call came in. A man had been heard shouting for help from the water. No boat nearby, no swimmers, just screaming, then silence. I arrived at the lake with my teammate Mark. We spotted something moving in the water about 30 yards out, a head bobbing, then disappearing beneath the surface. He was struggling hard. "Jesus, he's going under," Mark said. He grabbed his rescue line and ran toward the dock. I dove in. The shock of the cold stole my breath, my chest seized. I forced myself forward, kicking hard, pushing through water that felt thicker than it should. Something about the lake always felt heavier, like the water resisted movement. The man surfaced again, gasping. His arms flailed wildly. "I've got you!" I yelled. He didn't seem to hear me. His eyes were wide, too wide and unfocused. He wasn't looking at me, nor the shore. His gaze was fixed downward, like he was watching something beneath him pulling at his feet. Then his voice cut through the fog. "Where is he?" I reached for his arm, but he jerked away violently, as if frightened by my touch. "Where is my other me?" he croaked. Before I could react, he was dragged underwater. Not sinking, not slipping. Dragged. His arms shot straight up, mouth open in a silent scream, and he vanished beneath the surface so fast I barely had time to dive after him. The cold swallowed me again. Visibility was awful, nothing but swirling green dark water. I reached down blindly, grabbing for anything. Fabric, skin, hair. My fingers brushed something. Then it grabbed me back. A hand. Thin. Cold. Alive. It clamped around my wrist, squeezing hard enough to bruise. I kicked upward in panic, pulling myself free. When I surfaced, Mark was already on the dock shouting my name. I swam toward him, gasping, heart hammering. But something else surfaced too. The man. Floating face up, unmoving, eyes open. I swam back, hooked an arm under his shoulder, and dragged him toward the dock. His body was limp. His skin was colder than the water. We hauled him onto the dock, flipped him over, performed CPR. I checked his pulse. Nothing. Then, after almost 30 seconds, he gagged. My relief lasted half a second. And they weren't focused on us. They weren't focused on anything. His pupils were enormous, swallowing the iris. He blinked slowly. mechanically, as if forcing himself to remember how to do it. Mark leaned in. "Sir, can you hear me?" The man turned his head. His neck cracked audibly with the movement. Then he smiled. Wide, strange, wrong. "Is he still down there?" he whispered. Before either of us could answer, he sat up abruptly, spine stiff, and looked over the edge of the dock. His breathing became shallow. "He's close," he mumbled. "He wants to finish." "Who?" Mark asked. The man didn't respond. He stood, legs wobbling, and staggered toward the shore. Not toward a vehicle, not toward the road, toward the tree line. We followed him, calling out, but he didn't turn back. In seconds, he vanished into the woods. We searched for hours. Nothing. No footprints, no sign of him. It was like he walked into the trees and dissolved. The sheriff told us to keep quiet about the details. "People panic," he said. "Tourism drops. Let's not make a scene." I tried to put it behind me, until the next incident. 2 nights later, a teenager went missing near the lake's north shore. He and his friends had been night fishing when they saw something floating in the distance. A body. They said the figure was lying perfectly still, face down. They debated calling 911, but before they could do anything, the body rolled over and grinned at them. They said its eyes were open, glassy, reflective, like the inside was full of water. The kid dropped his fishing pole and backed away. His friends ran. He didn't. He walked straight into the lake, fully clothed, no hesitation. They called us 10 minutes later. I arrived with searchlights, boats, ropes. The sheriff joined us. The teen's mother stood on the shore, wailing into her hands. We scanned the lake's surface, nothing. I swam along the shoreline with my flashlight, nothing. Divers went down for 20 minutes at a time, nothing. At 3:14 a.m., the radio crackled. Surface movement near the south dock. I sprinted there, expecting the worst. We found the boy standing in shallow water, waist deep, staring blankly ahead. Mud clung to his clothes, algae coated his hair. His skin was a sickly, pale color. We pulled him out immediately. His mother wrapped her arms around him, but he didn't move, didn't react, didn't blink. He stared at the lake, just stared. When she tried to turn his head away, his neck resisted like a board. The sheriff knelt in front of him. "Son, what happened?" The boy blinked slowly, the same mechanical way the man had. Then he said, "My other me tried to come back too." The words rattled something deep inside me, something I'd been trying to ignore. The boy was examined at the hospital. Clean bill of health, no injuries, no hypothermia, no brain trauma. He just couldn't stop staring at reflective surfaces. Windows, metal trays, the polished floor. When I visited him the next day, he asked me a question I will never forget. "When you were underwater, did you see your hands?" I didn't know how to respond. "Did they move when you moved?" he whispered. "Or did they follow later?" I walked out of the hospital room without answering. 3 days later, the sheriff called me personally. "You need to get down here," he said. "Bring your gear." 2 fishermen had spotted something at dawn, floating near the center of the lake. They thought it was a deer carcass. When they got close, they realized it was human, or used to be. The body had no face, not mutilated, not decomposed, just smooth, pale skin where features should be, like clay that hadn't been shaped. But that wasn't the disturbing part. The disturbing part was the body was wearing the same shirt, shorts, and shoes as the man I had pulled out the first night, the one who walked into the woods and vanished. But the thing on the water wasn't him. It was an unfinished version, a blank version, like the lake was trying to make another copy and hadn't completed the details yet. The sheriff cursed under his breath. What the hell are we dealing with? I didn't know then. But I started to understand when we lifted the body into the boat. The moment its skin hit the air, the entire lake's surface trembled, not rippling from the boat, not wind. The water shivered, like something below reacted to the removal. We took the body to the coroner's office. I followed behind in my truck. Halfway there, my vision blurred. My breath caught. My left hand went numb. I pulled over, gripping the steering wheel. The sensation passed, slowly, but before it did, my reflection in the rearview mirror lagged half a second behind. Just like the boy asked, my hand in the mirror didn't move with me. It followed, too slowly. I slammed the mirror upward so I wouldn't see myself anymore. That night, I researched Crescent Lake's history. I learned something horrifying. Over the last 50 years, 13 people had drowned there. 8 of the bodies were recovered. 5 were never found. But in every case where a body was found, fishermen reported something weeks later. A second body, similar, clothed the same, face blank, unfinished copies. Locals thought it was a sick joke or misidentification. The police brushed them off, but after what I saw, the pattern was unmistakable. The lake wasn't taking people. It was trying to remake them, and failing, or experimenting. The man I saved wasn't the same afterward. Neither was the boy. Their behavior, their eyes, the strange stiffness, it all matched descriptions of survivors from decades before. People who were rescued weren't themselves anymore. Or maybe they were only half themselves. Maybe the lake kept the other half. 2 weeks later, everything came to a head. I got a call at midnight from an unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something in my chest squeezed. Instinct, dread, I couldn't tell. I answered. A watery voice whispered, "You left me down there." I recognized the tone immediately, even though the voice was distorted, like someone speaking through thick mud. It was the man I pulled out of the lake, or something trying to be him. I dropped the phone. Seconds later, I heard footsteps outside my house. Slow, dragging footsteps across wet ground. I grabbed my flashlight and went to the window. Someone stood at the edge of my yard. The man. Clothes dripping, skin pale, eyes wide, but his movements were wrong, jerky, delayed, like he was adjusting to gravity. He raised one hand. I flinched. He was holding something. My keychain, the one I'd lost at Crescent Lake 2 weeks earlier. I stepped back from the window. My hands trembled violently. He tilted his head at an unnatural angle. Then he mouthed the words, slowly, with stiff lips, "He is coming." I slammed the blinds shut, grabbed my phone, and called the sheriff. Before it rang twice, the man was at my door, his palms pressed flat against the glass. Long, wet fingerprints trailed downward. I backed into the hallway. My breathing was shallow. I prayed the door would hold. Then something else surfaced behind him, a shape. Huge, distorted, rising from the darkness. A human outline, taller than any man, but fluid and shifting, as if filled with water instead of bone. It wrapped itself around him, and he went still. Then both figures sank downward, into the soil, into nothing, like they were being pulled back, dragged home. I drove an hour away that night, checked into a motel, and didn't sleep once. The sheriff met me the next morning, pale and shaken. He said deputies found no footprints, no water trail, nothing at my house, but he believed me. He had to, because the coroner called him earlier with a disturbing update. They had run tests on the faceless body from the lake. The DNA didn't match anyone in the system, but the clothing fibers did. A perfect match for the man we rescued. Yet the corpse was missing something essential, something molecular. The coroner said, "It's like he isn't finished." The sheriff asked him what that meant. He said, "It means whatever lives in that lake isn't done trying." I told the sheriff I was leaving town. He didn't argue. He only said, "If something calls your name from water, you run." I haven't been near a lake since. But 2 nights ago, while brushing my teeth, my reflection lagged again. Just half a second. Just enough to notice. Just enough to realize, maybe I didn't escape the lake. Maybe part of me never came back. And maybe the part still down there is trying to finish what it started. The old concrete plant wasn't supposed to be my problem. It had been shut down for nearly 15 years, fenced off, posted with thick yellow warning signs, and guarded only by a rust-eaten padlock that looked like it had held on through pure stubbornness. But the property still belonged to the county, and after a series of break-ins in the area, they decided to hire a night security guard, just for precaution. That guard was me. I thought it would be another easy job. Long hours, little activity, nothing but the sound of wind pushing through empty metal frames. I'd worked graveyard shifts for years and knew how to handle quiet places. Quiet places don't scare me. It's what tries to fill the quiet that does. The concrete plant sat at the edge of town like a fossil. 3 massive silos towered overhead, their once white paint now flaked into gray scales. Conveyor belts, long dead, stretched like giant ribs across open pits. The main building held mixers, storage bays, and dusty offices that hadn't been used since 2010. Everything sagged with the weight of abandonment. The first 3 nights were uneventful. I brought a thermos of coffee, a small radio, and walked the grounds with a flashlight whose beam could barely cut through the shadows inside the storage bays. Rats skittered around the old machinery. Rust groaned in the cold. Nothing unusual. Then came the fourth night. It started with a noise not found in any abandoned place I'd ever worked. A low, breathy sound drifting up from one of the mixing pits. At first I thought it was wind pushing through broken vents, but wind doesn't rise and fall like a slow, deliberate exhale. It came again, an almost animal-like groan, a howl, soft, long, mournful. I froze halfway along the catwalk above the pits, gripping the guardrail. The sound drifted through the plant's hollow interior and echoed off the concrete walls, making it impossible to judge where it came from. I whispered to myself that it was a coyote, a dog, maybe even a drunk who wandered too far, anything human or natural. But the howl didn't sound natural. It started low, then climbed in pitch until it shook the catwalk beneath my feet. The metal bolts vibrated. My bones felt the noise before my ears did. I pointed my flashlight toward the pits. 3 massive cylinders of darkness yawned below me, deep, empty chambers where concrete had once churned day and night. Now they were nothing but holes leading into absolute black. The beam of my flashlight couldn't touch bottom. Another howl drifted up, this time closer, higher, like something climbing the darkness inside the pit. I stepped back from the rail. The howl cut off abruptly, like someone silenced it with a hand. Then came the scratching, something large scraping against metal deep inside the pit, long, trailing claws. I backed away quickly and returned to my guard station. I didn't investigate further, not that night. The next morning, I told my supervisor what I'd heard. He laughed, told me the plant had raccoons the size of toddlers, told me I'd get used to weird sounds. I tried to believe him, but the next night shattered that hope. I arrived early, around 9:30 p.m., while faint orange light still flickered at the horizon. The plant looked somehow different, as if the structures had shifted during the day. Shadows stretched long and wrong, bending in directions the setting sun didn't justify. When the darkness fully settled, I switched on my flashlight and started my patrol. Everything was quiet, too quiet. It wasn't until I reached Silo 2 that the noise started again. Not a howl this time, a voice. A deep, guttural moaning voice echoing from inside the silo. I shined my light into the lower hatch, but all I saw was dust swirling in the beam. The moan grew louder, vibrating the silo's metal sides like something huge was trapped inside. I leaned closer. The moan turned into a word. Not a word I understood, not anything human. Just a sound shaped deliberately, like a thing trying to mimic speech but failing horribly. I stumbled backward. Then something slammed against the inside of the silo, a massive, heavy blow that dented the exterior wall. Dust exploded from the seams. I turned and ran, nearly tripping on debris. I didn't return to the silos for the rest of the shift. By the time dawn came, I'd convinced myself the noise was machinery settling or rust collapsing. But later that afternoon, before my next shift, I stopped by the plant manager's office. He left the old keys and some paperwork. While he dug through drawers, I asked casually, "You ever hear weird noises from the silos?" His shoulders stiffened. He didn't look at me. "Don't worry about the silos," he said quietly. "Just do your rounds, keep the gates locked, and don't go poking where you don't need to." I forced a laugh. "Why? Something living in there?" He shut the drawer hard, harder than necessary. "Just leave them alone." That was all, but it wasn't enough. The plant was no longer quiet, and something inside it was no longer ignoring me. The 6th night is when everything broke open. The cold hit harder than usual. A fog settled across the plant, clinging to the steel beams and drifting through the empty lot like smoke. The moon was bright enough to illuminate the outlines of structures, but not enough to reveal details. Every shadow looked alive. At 1 a.m., while I was inside the control room, the radio crackled, static at first, then a deep, guttural breath, followed by a soft, drawn-out howl. The same howl I heard from the pit. I froze. The radio crackled again, then the howl shifted, turning into a distorted version of my name. Not clear, not human, like something inside a massive, hollow chamber trying to force the sound out. I dropped the radio. When I picked it up, the channel was dead. I tried to call dispatch. Nothing, not even static. All frequencies were just gone. A noise echoed from outside the control room. Metal scraping metal, slow, dragging, approaching. I backed toward the window, aiming my flashlight out into the fog. I saw nothing. but the scraping grew louder, circling the building. Something enormous was brushing against the walls, claws or tools scraping lines through the sheet metal siding. I tried to stay calm. Maybe a vandal? Maybe an animal? Then the footsteps started. Slow, heavy, deliberate thuds that rattled the floor beneath me. The control room shook with each impact. Whatever was outside was big, bigger than a person, bigger than any animal that had reason to be there. The footsteps stopped directly outside the door. I switched off my flashlight and held my breath. Silence. Then a single howl erupted so loud it vibrated my ribs. It wasn't outside anymore. It was inside the walls, inside the structure. The howling traveled up the metal beams, echoing downward from the ceiling. Dust fell around me in small clouds. Pipes shook, glass trembled, then the overhead lights flickered. Something huge moved through the rafters, shadows weaving between the cross beams, too tall and too long to fit inside the building without folding itself unnaturally. I ducked behind a console, clutching my flashlight. The thing howled again. This time, the howl carried weight, a physical pressure behind it. It wasn't lonely or painful, it was searching, calling. I waited, trembling, until the howling faded. When I finally left the control room, the fog had thickened so much the buildings looked like silhouettes in ash. I forced myself toward the loading bay. Then I heard it, coming from the largest mixer pit. A deep, rattling inhale, like something at the bottom of the pit was breathing in the cold air. The exhale came next, long, slow, wet. The fog in front of the pit rolled backward as if pulled toward the opening. Then I heard movement, heavy scraping, loud cracks, the squeal of metal. Something was climbing up the inside of the pit. I aimed my flashlight into the depths. It caught on something pale, a hand. Massive, too many knuckles, fingers long enough to wrap around a car door. It gripped the concrete wall, then another. Then a head rose into view. But it wasn't a head made for light. The skull was elongated, narrow, with no visible eyes, just deep indentations where eyes should be. Its mouth was wide enough to swallow a person whole. And inside that mouth, jagged shards of cement and rebar jutted out like mismatched teeth. It howled. The sound burst from its throat like steam from a ruptured pipe, shaking dust off the rafters. I ran. I sprinted across the lot, stumbling over broken rebar and chunks of debris. The ground trembled behind me as the creature climbed fully out of the pit. I didn't look back. The fence gate was 50 yards away. 40, 30. The ground thundered. The howl blasted the fog apart. I reached the gate and fumbled with the lock. My hands shook so violently I dropped the keys twice. When I finally forced the gate open, I sprinted to my truck and dove inside. The moment I slammed the door, something hit the fence. The chain link rattled with such force, the entire frame bowed outward. A massive shadow loomed behind the metal, shifting with every breath. It howled again, loud enough to shatter the passenger side window. I ducked, shielding my head. Glass rained onto the seat. I jammed the keys into the ignition, praying the engine would start. It sputtered, just once, then roared to life. I reversed so fast the tires spun. The creature struck the fence again, bending steel like cardboard. I tore down the road, gravel flying behind me. I didn't slow down until I reached town. I pulled over behind a gas station, heart pounding, hands shaking uncontrollably. The next morning, the county shut down the concrete plant indefinitely. They told the public it was due to structural collapse and dangerous instability. They didn't mention the dents ripped into the silos. They didn't mention the deep claw marks carved into the catwalk. They didn't mention what the demolition crew heard inside the pits when they surveyed the site. A low, rumbling howl. Alive, enormous, waiting. I quit the job, moved 2 states away, tried to forget everything. But 2 nights ago, while walking my dog near an old industrial site, I heard a sound drifting from an open drainage culvert. Low, deep, wet, a howl, slowly rising, slowly falling. My dog whimpered and pulled hard on the leash, dragging me back toward the street. When I turned my flashlight toward the culvert, the fog inside rolled backward as if something massive inhaled. Something that remembered me. Something that climbed out of a concrete pit once. Something still looking and still howling.